D&D Beyond now fits in the palm of your hand with the free D&D Beyond app. It's the perfect toolset for beginners, regular players, and seasoned dungeon masters. Play faster with the guided character creator and access your character sheets, spells, and abilities wherever you go. All of your adventures and source books are at your fingertips, even when you're offline. Easily find and access the rules you need when you need them. With more features to come, download the free D&D Beyond app today.
Welcome back to D&D Beyond. I am Amy Dallen, and I am so excited to be here today talking to another of the writers that gave us my newly beloved Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Please welcome Dan Dillon. Hi!
Hey, it's really great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on, Amy.
I'm very excited to meet you and talk with you all about the art of making books like this and the pieces that you helped contribute to it and how it all changes. And personally, this is something I've always struggled with, how to make monsters. I've been playing D&D for a long time, but I don't have a ton of experience with building monsters. So this is a great day for me as I get to just be like, tell me the secrets, Dan Dillon.
Yeah, monsters are kind of important to D&D for the most part. You know, you're playing your heroes who are out there righting wrongs, fighting evil, saving the downtrodden, all that good stuff. So you're going to run into a lot of things to overcome, and a lot of times that takes the form of monsters. So they're out there.
They're always trying to stop us. What's up with that?
I know. Threatening the townsfolk. It's not okay.
So, first of all, and I'd love to ask this question because I immediately asked this and learned a lot from just the asking. What would be the answer to which monsters you made for any given book? And what does that mean?
Sure. So when you talk about monsters that someone made, particularly in a book like Van Richten's, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that the base creation of a lot of these monsters came from folklore, from real world stories. Then once we kind of look at all of those things that might fit into a book, the lead designer on the project will pick, okay, this is the roster of monsters that are going to be in it. And then they will assign designers to create a first draft of each of those monsters. So I can tell you about the ones that I created the drafts for. And then once the draft is created, it goes to the rest of the team. And then basically everybody gets eyes and hands on it for revision and just polishing it up and making everything just super awesome for when it hits the page for real. So it really is a huge team effort, and no one thing in any D&D book is like someone's creation. It's everybody gets into it. So yeah, we could talk about some of the ones that I created drafts for and go through those.
I would love to do that. Okay, so the first of these monsters that we're going to look at that you laid down some initial track for, and this is something else I just learned. It's not the Loup Garou, it turns out.
It is.
I thought it was
not,
going to be the Loup Garou.
I thought so for a long time as well. The Loup Garou,
what is a Loup Garou, and how can we bring it to our games?
Sure. So at its very basic sort of elevator pitch, a Loup Garou is to werewolves as the vampire lord is to a vampire spawn. So this is the boss level werewolf. This is the one who's going to run the entire pack of lesser werewolves and might be the hidden cult leader that all of this danger and death is centering around. So they're a legendary creature. They're much higher challenge rating. They're CR 13. They've got the legendary actions. They're just real nasty in battle, and they're quick shape changers. They change their shape as a bonus action as opposed to eating their whole turn to do it. So they just get right in there. And even one of their legendary actions even lets them shift as part of it. So they can even change outside of their own turn and then just get right into the nasty. So one of the coolest things about the Loup Garou, though, is their lycanthropy is insidious. The normal werewolf bites you, you fail your saving throw, you gain the curse of lycanthropy. And so on the full moon, you're going to change and do all that horrible werewolf stuff. The Loup Garou is much more difficult to break that curse. Regular werewolf, you can just cast remove curse and poof, you're fine. Not so with this one. At this one, you actually have to slay the Loup that laid the curse down upon you. Until you slay the head of this werewolf lineage, you cannot break the curse. So
that was the thing that I loved from reading the description. It was just like, oh, we've got, a sire mechanic here. I see.
Yeah. And even once you have killed the head werewolf, you can break the curse, but it's not guaranteed. It requires saving throws, and even if you succeed, it's going to leave you drained and debilitated. And if you fail the save, you're stuck for another month until the next full moon when they can try again. Oh, that's the other thing. They have to try and break the curse during the full moon while you're wolfed out.
I love the way that links up nicely with the curse design. We were lucky enough to have Wes Schneider on last week to talk with us and talking about making curses sort of cumbersome and not so sort of easy to clear up. Like, oh no, I have a pimple. Please get rid of the pimple. Not that those are not their own kind of curse, but the particularly insidious ones should cost a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. Curses that can be debilitating in combat in the moment, things like the mummy rot and all that. So those are cool and they have their place. But when you're really telling horror stories, you want that stuff to feel like a burden. And that's what the Loup-Garou's Curse of Lycanthropy and the actual curses section in the book really leans into, is making those a story unto themselves.
All right. And if you are watching live right now, you may have noticed that while I have picked out with Dan a couple of monsters that we definitely want to talk about, I figured as long as we have you all here, please weigh in on which one of our spotlights will fall on either the Vampiric Mind Slayers or the Body Taker plants. Did I say Mind Slayers? Pretend I said Mind Flayers.
Yeah, we got it.
Oh no, it's clipped forever. Vampiric Mind Flayers. It's because I was talking about siring and vampires and my head's just in several directions. Please weigh in on that poll and it will help us decide which thing we will focus on while we have Dan here. But I do have some formal questions for the Loup-Garou. Please,
sure.
What was your goal in creating this monster or in contributing that first draft?
Sure. So in creating my draft, the first design goal that Wes provided to me was make this the Vampire Lord equivalent of the werewolf. And so that was step one, right? And so then that's where everything I sort of mentioned before, the legendary resistance, the legendary actions, the fast shape changing, no sacrificing your whole turn to wolf out. It's supposed to be fast paced, dangerous. It's supposed to feel like pulse pounding werewolf movie. This thing has leapt out of the shadows and it's go time, right? It's life or death. One of my favorite things on this one, though, is unlike lycanthropes in the monster manual, which have immunity to weapons if they're not magic or silver, the Loup-Garou doesn't have that. No immunity, no resistances, nothing like that. What they do have is regeneration. So at the start of their turn, they start healing all of the wounds you put on them. And the only way to turn it off, outside of some specific magic exceptions, the only general way to turn it off is to use a silver weapon, not a magic weapon. So if you don't have silver weapons in your party, you can't kill it. So the best you can do is maybe slow it down for a while and try to come up with a better plan.
I love that, and I believe I saw that on the Were Ravens as well. Spoilers for a different part of the monster. It's a very cool, it just won't take unless you've got that extra step, which is a wonderful approach to, it's not just that the weapon's more effective, it's that you have to meet several conditions for the defeat. Right. I love that. That's so cool. Yeah. And that, I feel like, kind of answers my next question, which was how do you approach the features and mechanics to kind of give it a Ravenloft level of scariness?
Yeah, you start with that, what is the cinematic moment? What is the splash page I want this fight to look like when you're fighting this monster? And then I try to pull all of those elements, think about how they would feel, and then you start thinking about translating that into mechanics. So with the regeneration thing, it's not like you stab it and your sword bounces off or does nothing. You want them to think for a moment that they're actually doing what they're intending to do. They're putting damage on this thing. They're beating it back. And then when its turn comes around and it just brushes the blood and sliced fur and the wound away. And then, so they realize, oh, okay, we have to pay attention here. And then once they finally do drop it, then you have that moment where it's not really done and its turn. Maybe you leave it for dead and it just lies there and waits and heals up and slinks away. And then it comes at you again later. Maybe it pops up
dramatic
while you're
hand
licking your own.
Name.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Maybe it leaps out of the shadows on your back while you're licking your wounds after you thought you've won the battle. And so it brings that element of, oh no, why? into the fight. And that's what I look for. You look for ways to grab those narrative conceits and then drive it home mechanically. Another way to do that is using, in this case, it's just using an existing trait in other monsters, the blood frenzy trait. This thing goes into a frenzy whenever it's fighting someone who is already wounded. So its attacks are much more devastating, much more accurate. It doesn't miss when it has a meal in its crosshairs.
Do you have any advice for folks who are running them? Any ways to use them most effectively in an encounter?
Sure. One of the things I would make sure that you do is pay attention to the legendary actions. And this thing is incredibly mobile. It can move up to its speed using its mauling pounce. It can knock people prone. It can be all over the battlefield. It costs more of its actions to do, but that's all right. Right. And then once you've got it in good positions and you're moving it around where you want it to go and they're having a hard time pinning it down, if you have if you want to burn all of your legendary actions for the turn on extra bites, you can start trying to spread lycanthropy around through the party. And so if you have, 2, 3, maybe all the members of the party rolling constitution saves in a round to see who, or over the course of the fight, and they don't know who's passed, who's failed, if someone might be cursed, if they know the deal, then that kind of ratchets up the paranoia level where they're going to have to be like, all right, how long is it until the next full moon? Because we're going to have to watch everybody who was bitten. And so there's a lot of fun ways
the thing scenario. Yeah,
exactly. So these things become an ongoing tension even outside of the specific encounter that you've built them in.
Oh, I love it. Did you have any story hooks in mind when you created the Loup Garou? Or contributed the first draft there?
Yeah. So some of like what I was saying there, a little bit of a hit and run tactic where you could have the Loup Garou pop up, attack, spread lycanthropy, and then fade away. And the fact that they're able to change so easily and they have control over their forms and they form these packs of loyal werewolves means that you can also do a little bit of an Among Us or a sort of werewolf the party game situation where you don't know who is the Loup Garou or who are its cursed minions. And so you're going to have to investigate the village and try and put the clues together to figure out who's the one who keeps showing up to these lightning raids at night to dash out, maul someone, maybe kill them, maybe curse them, and then fade away, and then just step back into the population.
And that kind of creeping dread could make for a great ongoing story NPC interactions. Oh, that's so good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move to our second monster. Our second spotlight monster for today is going to be the cute, the cuddly, the lovable Boneless.
Could be either way. There it is. Okay, I was gonna say this could fit either of them. Where are we going?
Can you tell me a little bit about
everybody's
favorite, the Boneless?
Absolutely. So this one, I'm unsure if this is more of a folklore one. This is actually a transplant from Old Edition Ravenloft. This is from Second Edition that I got to sort of play with and translate and pull forward, and that was a delight because Ravenloft is in a death grip for my favorite setting of all time in D&D. So it's wrestling for the number one spot. Sometimes it's ahead, sometimes it fall behind. Right now it's right up there. So getting to go back to things from my D&D history, high school Dan is just screaming right now, has no idea what's going on. So the Boneless is super fun. This is the cast off flesh of a person. And maybe they were flayed and their bones were removed. So some necromancer could make an animated skeleton and they just discarded the rest. Maybe they were feeling cheeky and pumped some necrotic energy into those remains to waste not, want not. Maybe it arose from something a little more naturally, like the horrible mists and death energy from a charnel pit, from a murderer's victim, something like that. But it's just the flesh of a person, no bones, no hard stuff. So they can kind of walk like a people, but they're floppy and don't have a lot of structure, so you can see them coming from a little ways away. And then when they attack you, they wrap themselves around you in this sort of terrible, terrible hug. And they smother you and they blind you and they just start constricting. And it's awful and it's the best.
How did you approach features and mechanics to make this Ravenloft level scary? I feel like the warm embrace is a major factor there.
Yep. So the easy part was looking at what was done before, how they were presented in second edition, and then conceptually taking those ideas and then translating them into modern mechanics for that fit with our game's current sensibilities. And then, like, when you dig deeper into it a little bit, it gets into what are those horrible moments, right? What is the oh no moment where the boneless jumps into the fray and you have that cinematic clip in your head of what's happening, and that's where the compression trait came from, which is a little bit like the amorphous trait that creatures like oozes have, where they can squeeze through narrow openings. Because this thing has no bones, it can fit through something that it can squish its squishy parts through. So it could squeeze through openings that are at least an inch wide. But here's the kicker: it can also fit into and stop in the space that a tiny creature could fit into. So it can kind of fold and squish itself down to fit in a shoebox, or a drawer in the kitchen when you're exploring the haunted house and you open it up and this thing just like one of those cans full of spring snakes, except just so much worse.
What do you think they smell like?
Oh, just nothing good. I mean, it's going to be rot. It's going to be probably something mystically wrong and dark, like just things that prickle your nose, a smell that crawls across your tongue and dies and just hangs out in there, and it's in your mouth and you can't get rid of it. Yeah, it's bad. Maybe a little formaldehyde if they came from a necromancer's lab. Oh, yeah.
All right, so I'm pretty sure the kitchen drawer thing is the perfect answer to this, but what are some great ways to uniquely use a boneless in an encounter, or advice for folks who are running them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. Think about any tiny space where something like, the size of a little kitty or, a bird could fit into. This thing can be in there. And it can be in the bottom of a treasure chest. It could be in someone's bag, not even a bag of holding. We can talk about the bag man, and I'm sure it has been talked about elsewhere. But yeah. Okay, one of my favorite ways to do this would be, what if you have a necromancer's guards who's got animated skeletons, and then, feeling cheeky, they animated the flesh cast off as a boneless. And so the boneless wraps itself around the skeleton. So what you have is what you think are zombies shambling at the party. And then as they get close, the boneless springs off and attacks. And then you have that to deal with that is smothering your wizard, while the skeleton it just jumped off of is trying to stab you. It's, just that's a time that nobody wants.
That's amazing. Monsters wearing other monsters as outfits in a terrible symbiosis. I love it so much. Did you have any story hooks in mind when you worked on the boneless?
Yeah, so this one, it could be either just a simple sort of addition or addendum to any sort of necromancy or, deathly magic story where they're kind of a cast off or a side effect, or the stalker in the haunted house. Like, you could run a pretty good riff off of the Alien film using a boneless and its ability to, squish through vents and mouse holes and get in the walls and dart out and attack people one by one. That sort of fun thing.
And I love what you suggested about them being potential remnants. Could really lend itself to some strong thematic resonance for different kinds of campaigns that are about sort of the consequences of, bad choices that people make, or careless or inhumane choices can leave the boneless lying around, to just really literalize all that good stuff.
Yeah, these could be a great sort of comeuppance, either for an NPC or villainous wizard, necromancer who's doing their thing, and then the boneless are shambling out of the the vents where they've been hiding, or for a PC who is careless or makes some questionable choices. Maybe this could be a nasty consequence where the dark powers reach out with a tendril of mist and say, "Okay, here you go.
I got you a present. It's cuddly."
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. Cannot wait to meet and then promptly attempt to run from the boneless in a campaign. And I believe we have some results from our poll. Thank you, everybody. Narrowly edging out a victory with 54% of the vote. We would love, please, to hear about the Vampiric Mind Flayers.
Excellent. Let me just
one of my absolute favorites, and the way they tie into the domains. Just so exciting.
Yeah, let me just pull that up real quick so I have that delightful little friend to look at on my handy.
I may just straight up read the beginning of this because I love the prose on these. When the mind flayers of Blutzspur could find no cure for their overlord's affliction, Their degenerating elder brain turned to radical methods to stave off dementia and death. The results were vampiric mind flayers, feral atrocities spawned from mind flayer tadpoles infected with vampirism. There's way more to it, but please tell us a little bit about where did this come from? What were you drawing on, and what were you going for?
Sure. Once again, this is another classic from second edition Ravenloft, and as you noted in the opening prose, they're from the domain of Bluetspur, that's run by this conglomerated, horrible, super powerful elder brain, the things that run Mind Flayer colonies, and it is dying. And given that these things are normally sort of immortal and super long lived, dying for it is, it may take hundreds or thousands of years for this to sort of play itself out. But it knows it's dying, and it is desperate to end that threat to its own life. And so in a desperate bid to stave off this degeneration that's killing it, it created these vampiric mind flayers. It took the little tadpoles that it usually has in its brine pool to drop in a hapless victim to turn them into a mind flayer, which is how they propagate. It's super fun. And started experimenting with in creating undead ones. And so these things are the result of that. Other mind flayers look at these and are horrified. These are abominations. Mind flayers want nothing to do with them, but they have to because the god brain says so. And what are you going to do? So just think about anything that gives a mind flayer nightmares, and then we got this fun fellow here. So they're feral, they're nasty, they're undead, they are barely sapient, right? They are very low intelligence, low function. They basically have one purpose, and that purpose is to go out and find thinking, feeling things and use their tentacles that have these fang-like thorns on the end of them now. They don't eat brains, but they dig those into the nervous system of their victims and draw out all of that delicious cerebrospinal fluid. So they take all of that, drain it into themselves, usually leaving their victims a poor husk, and then they bring it back to the god brain, and then they dissolve it. They dissolve themselves into this briny fluid to add to its pool. And every time they do that, that buys the god brain a little time. And so it sends its little buddies here out into the mist. Right? They wander out from Bluetspur. They find their way to other domains. They might even find their way to the material plane or other planes of the multiverse, because that's how the mists work. The mists go everywhere and anywhere. And so anywhere you go, you might run into one of these lurking in a corner. And the god brain's nature is such that it can actually cast its telepathy through the mists to wherever its minions are. So really nowhere is safe. They still have some of the psionic abilities of their mind flayer counterparts. They're not as focused, so they don't have that sort of psionic spellcasting equivalent, but they basically create this just big blast of psionic static that disrupts people and incapacitates them, prevents them from acting. So it's just real nasty. They skitter around on the walls like vampires with spider climb. They do hate the sun, so there's a good weapon you have against them. Yeah, they're just...
I know, and I'm sorry, I'm just smiling bigger and bigger, but they're such a cool monster, and I love, folks who've been watching these streams will know that I am very, very taken with the ways that the mists work now, and what can and can't communicate and reach through them, and of course with the unique torments of the Dark Lord. So Bluetspur on both of those accounts is one of my favorite domains, because that telepathic reach and that central unending mission for the domain is such fertile ground for storytelling. So how did you approach those features and mechanics when you were trying to figure out how to update and bring the Vampiric Mind Flayers into 5e, into the new version of Ravenloft, into this book?
Yeah. So for this one, it was looking at creating a delightful fusion of Mind Flayer and vampire spawn. These guys are not the Strahd level vampire, right? These are not your Dracula. These are barely even a Renfield, but they're real nasty. These are like that feral, almost zombie movie version of vampire. So they had to be quick, they had to be brutal, they had to be real nasty. So they have the spider climb. They can get around into places you wouldn't expect them to be. They can communicate telepathically, but they're not really there enough to speak, so they project emotional flashes. So you can have these just feelings of oppressive dread and hunger, and not really sure where it's coming from until this thing makes itself known and attacks. And then taking the classic mind flayer thing of the whole tentacles eating brain, all of that delightful stuff, and then flipping on its head a little bit and giving it a vampire twist. So you think vampire plus mind flayer equals probably not drinking blood, drinking, nervous system fluid. And so that's where that comes from, where they do psychic damage, they lay exhaustion on you as they suck these fluids out and leave drained husks in their wake as they take their stolen gains back to their boss. And these, so like there was a lot to think of. It's how do you take one of these hyper intellect mastermind mind flayers and then bring it down to the level of starving wolf?
Right. Without taking away the thing that makes them special, trying to find a new combo form. What advice would you have for folks who are running Vampiric Mind Flayers, or what's a unique way to use them in an encounter?
Sure. Take it back to when you're using them in an encounter, make sure you're using their climb speed and their spider climb, because that's going to give them 3 dimensions. They're going to be able to come at you from angles that you're not expecting. And then keep in mind that their Disrupt Psyche is a bonus action. This is not something that they have to use for their turn the way a Mind Flayer would use their Mind Blast. This is something they can do.
Past that. Oh my God.
They can do this just in addition to everything else that they're doing. It's on a recharge, so they don't necessarily get to do it every turn, but if you have multiple of them, you could, stagger which ones you're using. So this one will Disrupt Psyche this turn. The other one will catch it next turn, and maybe you can kind of ping pong back and forth as they refresh their ability. And it's a big radius, and it locks down the party's ability to defend themselves. And so you can really just latch on to getting past your frontline beefcakes to get at the squishy casters behind, or however you want to use these guys terrifyingly. Using them as like an adventure hook, these are cool because, as I mentioned, they go through the mists. They can end up anywhere. So you could fight one of these things and slay it, and someone's been killing people in the village, and these horrible desiccated bodies are left behind. This is terrible. You find the thing, you kill it, everything's great, right? Maybe not, because now they've found their way here, and so they might keep coming through the mist every time the mists arise. So you might actually have to go into Spur to sort of cut this off at the source, and that's just a recipe for nightmares.
Like, how would you leave clues that maybe there were 5 of them, but you only got 4, and one of them made it back out?
Yeah, how would you do that? That'd be a great way to leverage anybody who has survival proficiency to check tracks, or if someone has like an animal companion or a familiar, they could realize that no, the familiar saw a 5th one while we were fighting, and we've only got 4 puddles of goo here that used to be mind flayers, right? That sort of thing. That could be cool.
Incredible. I will now cheat. And despite the fact that I called a poll and it was all very fairly decided, all of the monsters sound good. So just a mini little glimpse, please. Can you tell us a little about, I love this monster. Tell us a little about the Body Taker plant.
Sure. The Body Taker plant is another classic. This one actually came from a Chris Perkins adventure from Dungeon Magazine way back in the day. And it was very much an invasion of the body snatchers sort of thing. So we couldn't leave that sitting by the wayside. We had to bring that back up. So the Body Taker plant is this horrible sort of melon patch plant that digs its roots in deep into the ground and then spreads and creates this central sort of pod. And as someone comes close to it, it can grab them with its tendrils and pull them into the pod and then digest them, kind of like a Venus flytrap, and then spit out a podling, which is an exact duplicate of the person that it devoured. And so, that just, the stories start writing themselves, right?
The podling stat block this is an inspiring journey by itself. Like, if you can read that and not have 5 story ideas, just so fascinating. That I think I'm gonna tip my hand. I think my favorite bits are the sort of the telltale signs that you built in.
Yep. Those are super fun. So when you have people who are replaced by podlings, they have ticks, little things that are different about the person that they're emulating. They're not a perfect copy, right? They get a little fuzzy as you get away from the original, and so those can give them away. that that's a tell that this person is not who they seem. And so a great way to use them would be to take someone that the party has interacted with before and they know, and now suddenly this person is right-handed instead of left-handed. And that might take them a little while to realize that, hey, that's something's a little weird here. And then they put their finger on it. Or they've picked up some new speech mannerism or pattern, or their accent is a little different. That sort of just little things that you wouldn't necessarily get right off the bat. But as you interact with someone, you'll start to pick it up and realize slowly that things are not what they seem. And then this is injecting another layer of that paranoia. How many people in town have been replaced with podlings? Because once you have one, they're certainly going to lead somebody else out to that secluded patch of woods where the vines are growing.
And I love that several of the monsters we've talked about have those story things built in. They are trying to feed someone else or recruit victims for someone else or gather things. And so each of these conflicts can potentially lead to a web of other conflicts in a way that, very thoughtful for you all to make it that easy on us.
Yeah, we are here to bring you gifts.
Dark gifts.
Yeah, dark gifts. That's another chapter.
It's D&D.